It is the 7th of December 1939, a week after the Soviet invasion of Finland. In what was supposed to be a quick war and an easy victory, Soviet troops, led by inexperienced officers as a result of Stalin's purge of the Red Army, find themselves bogged down in the brutal conditions of the Finnish Winter War, suffering horrific casualties. From Berlin, an ecstatic Hitler observes the incompetence of the new Soviet officers, convinced that Stalin's Great Purge had paralyzed the effectiveness of the Red Army, justifying his plans for a future invasion of the Soviet Union by saying, "We only have to kick in the door and the entire rotten structure will come crashing down." But why did Stalin commence his Great Purge in such a dangerous geopolitical moment, where the Soviet Union was surrounded by enemies on all fronts, waiting to pounce on the perceived Soviet weakness? And what was the true history behind the Great Purge of 1936-38? This is the historiographer, and today we will explore the history behind Stalin's Great Purge, in which hundreds of thousands of Communist Party members, Red Army officers, members of the intelligentsia, and even innocent civilians were arbitrarily arrested upon the callous orders of one man, Joseph Stalin. Before Lenin's death in 1924, Stalin had already been appointed as General Secretary of the Soviet Union, a position created by Vladimir Lenin which had immense powers. Stalin used his General Secretary position to appoint new local party leaders, thereby establishing a network of people loyal to Stalin. When Lenin died in 1924, Stalin presented himself as a centrist, as the successor of Lenin, and began making strategic alliances, much to the anger of his archenemy Leon Trotsky. Fast forward to 1928, and Stalin had managed to come out on top. Trotsky had been exiled, his supporters purged, and any opposition to Stalin silenced. The Georgian used the NKVD, the secret Soviet police agency, to exert his influence, mainly by appointing loyal NKVD chiefs such as Gendrikh Yakoda. By 1934, Stalin's position was relatively secure, though it was threatened by a rising star in party ranks, the young Sergei Kirov. Sergei Kirov was murdered, likely by the orders of Stalin himself. Stalin thus used Kirov's murder to justify and commence his Great Purge, during which approximately 1 million people would perish. Over the past 20 years since the 1917 revolution, Stalin had made many enemies, ranging from Civil War brothers-in-arms such as General Tukhachevsky, old Bolsheviks, the clergy, dissatisfied party members, ex-landowners known as kulaks, and other influential celebrities. These were conveniently labeled as fifth columnists by Stalin and suffered the brunt of his purge. Further, with rising dangers from Japan and Germany, Stalin most likely believed that a house-cleaning operation in the Red Army had to take place now, lest this fifth column start a counter-revolution in the midst of a foreign attack. This, on top of the General Secretary's paranoid personality and sadistic NKVD chiefs such as Gendrikh Yagoda and Nikolai Yezhov, created the perfect recipe for the Red Terror. Historians attribute the start of the Great Purge with the first Moscow trial in 1936. In August of 1936, under Gendrikh Yagoda, the first trial occurred. Notable Bolsheviks, including Grigory Zinoviev, Lev Kamenev, and Ivan Smirnov, were accused of conspiring with Leon Trotsky, now in exile in Norway, to form a terrorist group aiming to remove Stalin from power. The prosecution alleged their involvement in Sergei Kirov's assassination. They were found guilty on August 24, 1936, after a forced confession by torture methods, and executed. Ironically, the secret police chief Yagoda was removed by Stalin from his position a few months later due to his apparent failure to entirely prosecute the Trotskyite leftist counter-revolutionary bloc, and was replaced by a much more brutal man, Nikolai Yezhov, where Yagoda was executed by Stalin and Yezhov for being a German agent in the last Moscow trial in 1938. However, it wasn't until 1937 with the second Moscow trial that the purge truly started to ramp up. In January 1937, under Nikolai Yezhov's leadership, The second trial began, implicating 17 lesser party figures such as Sokolnikov and Radek. These were accused of forming an anti-Soviet Trotskyite center and collaborating with Trotsky to sabotage the Soviet economy and defense. The verdict by late January resulted in Sokolnikov, Radek, and 2 others receiving 10-year sentences, while the rest were executed. In July of 1937, Stalin issued a confidential directive to regional party and NKVD leaders, ordering them to identify and apprehend kulaks and criminals in their areas for execution or deportation to gulag camps. Compliance was swift, with quotas generated within days, largely targeting individuals already under secret police surveillance. On July 30, 1937, NKVD Order 00447 was issued, targeting ex-kulaks and other anti-Soviet elements for execution or imprisonment. Many arrests were arbitrary, based on denunciations or associations with those already detained. Workers in factories were also targeted, often labeled as saboteurs based merely on accidents in the workplace. During the Great Terror, the Orthodox clergy lost 85% of its 35,000 members. Local NKVD units worked relentlessly to meet quotas, often resorting to torture to extract confessions. The Kulak operation alone saw nearly 400,000 executions, over half of all known executions during this period. The army wasn't safe either, as a secret military tribunal in June of 1937 targeted Red Army commanders, including the famed Mikhail Tukhachevsky, with confessions extracted under extreme psychological pressure and torture. Despite promises of sparing the lives of the families of the commanders in exchange for confession, Stalin broke his word, and most of the families of the defendants were executed after their trials. Initially, it was believed that 25 to 50% of Red Army officers were actually purged, but the figure is estimated to be 3.7 to 7% after declassified documents were revealed in the 90s. Many purged officers were expelled from the party, though some were later allowed to return to service. With the wealth of experience and knowledge having been lost with the purged Soviet officers, the Red Army's effectiveness in the Winter War, which started against Finland in November of 1939, where the Red Army lost 320,000 casualties compared to Finland's 70,000. Further, the Great Terror influenced German decision-making in the Second World War, with Hitler believing that the Red Army's effectiveness had been diminished after the purge, thereby influencing his decision to invade the Soviet Union in Operation Barbarossa in 1941. In any case, the third and final trial, held in March of 1938, also known as the Trial of the 21, is largely considered the end of the Great Purge. Meant to be the climax of previous proceedings, it implicated 21 individuals allegedly belonging to the bloc of rightists and Trotskyites led by Nikolai Bukharin, an old Bolshevik, and Genrikh Yagoda, the recently disgraced head of the NKVD, among other defendants. The trial accused Bukharin and others of plotting to assassinate Lenin and Stalin, partition of the USSR, and hand territories to foreign powers. Knowing that his death was imminent, Bukharin sarcastically confessed for his crimes by saying, "I accept responsibility even for those crimes about which I did not know or about which I did not have the slightest idea." Though Stalin marked out that statement, leaving only "I accept responsibility" in the trial's records. The increasingly absurd allegations made it harder for even sympathetic observers to accept, leading to disillusionment among Western intellectuals, some of whom renounced communism in the wake of Bukharin's trial and execution. Nikolai Yezhov had lost favor by 1938, and Stalin had him executed in 1940 and replaced by Lavrenti Beria, an entirely different monster. In conclusion, despite what many Stalinists claim, the Great Purge was a dark chapter in Stalin's history. While it is true that Yezhov abused his powers as NKVD chief, Stalin nevertheless knew about Yezhov's actions, carrying them in joint accordance. Necessary or not, the Great Purge was a tragic loss of life and a terrifying period in Soviet history. What made the purge so terrifying was its random nature, and no one was safe from the hands of the NKVD. If you like this video, then consider subscribing to spread history. This has been the Historiographer, and for now, see you in the next video.